We also have to pause and consider our own legacies. And I think a lot about our students need to know from where it was we came, and they need to know about the struggles and the triumphs, and they need to think about what's it going to take to get us to where we want to be. And we all have to look at that together. So one of the things that I was thinking a lot about last night as I looked out on the audience, I was thinking about the fact that when I was a student, and some of you have heard this story, so forgive me, one of the tasks that I had to do for my qualifying exams, Paul Sindelar, was to, he's like, I don't think I remember this, but was to trace my professional lineage. And at the time I was given this qualifying exam question, I said, you've got to be kidding me. Really? This is a qualifying exam question? And then I started looking, and then I started learning, and then I started thinking about this. And to this day, I really believe that was one of the most profound things I ever did, because it helped me discover who I am as a professional. And it helped me discover, even over all of these years, who shaped me and how I came to be who I am. I think it's an important activity, an important exercise to think about. You can see how you've been shaped as students. So I welcome you all here. And I just want to say that the very first, it's all connected. So the very first article that I ever wrote as a doctoral student was with Paul. And it was called, let me go back. The Power, sorry, I should know this. The Power of Hypothesis Testing in Special Education Efficacy Research. And the very first article Paul had us read was Goldstein, Moss, and Jordan. So the other night I'm driving Laura home, and she's holding this book on her lap. And I said, Laura, what is that book? Goldstein, Moss, and Jordan. The Gallaghers brought it with them to give Laura the copy of Gold. So it all comes around, right? We're all connected. So I want to thank you all for being here, and I think we have a great day planned. So welcome again. All right, so we've assembled a panel of leaders here. And suffice it to say, I'm not going to go through the list of publications because we would be here until 12 o'clock learning about those, or honors or accolades, but I do want to say, I just want to do a very, very brief introduction for those of you who weren't able to be there last night. So last night we met Drs. Ann and Rudd Turnbull. Both of them are Ross and Mariana Beach Distinguished Professors of Special Education at the University of Kansas and co-founders of the Beach Center on Disability. The Beach Center is described as a vital hub of national and international research and development on contemporary issues impacting the quality of life for individuals with disabilities and their families. And this is a very interesting fact that I learned. Both Ann and Rudd each were selected as one of 36 people who, quote, changed the course of history for individuals with intellectual disabilities in the 20th century. So we're very happy to have Ann and Rudd here. We also had the opportunity to meet Paul Sindelar, a distinguished professor in the Department of Special Education, Psychology, and Early Childhood Studies at the University of Florida in Gainesville. He's secured millions of dollars in grant funding and has been repeatedly recognized for his contributions to the field, particularly in the area of teacher education. I now want to introduce you to Dr. Fred Spooner, professor of the Department of Special Education and Child Development at the University of North Carolina at Charlotte. Fred is a leader in moderate severe intellectual disabilities and professional preparation. And I want to point out that both Fred and Paul are recipients of the Ted Pearson Award for Excellence in Education, which recognizes individuals who demonstrate, and this is a quote, exemplary commitment to teacher education and special education, preparation of future leaders or quality educators, and research supporting the preparation of teachers and the delivery of services to children with disabilities, legislative leadership, and scholarly works. And then it gives me great pleasure to introduce to you our other panel members. Laura Jordan. Which one is Laura? No. Laura Jordan received her master's degree in the early days of IREC here at Illinois, which is a program that was started by Sam Kirk. After teaching for 6 years, Sam enticed her back to Illinois, and she eventually completed her PhD under Jim Gallagher. Laura was the head of the Department of Special Education from 1988 and 1991. In 1988, she hired me. So if you don't like that, you can talk to her afterwards. But Laura was the lifeblood of the department, and I remember the day that she told me she was retiring, I cried, because she and I became fast friends and have been since. Dr. Robert Henderson, woohoo! So Dr. Robert Henderson received his degree at the University of Illinois in 1957 under the guidance of Sam Kirk. We've heard his name once or twice. He was asked by Sam to chair the new Department of Special Education in 1964 and continued in that role until 1971. And then again from 1981 to 1987. Through Bob's leadership, this department grew into one of the most influential departments of special education in our country. So we're so pleased to have this panel. And here's what I asked them to do. I told them that this would be a very informal panel. And I have some questions. The first question that I want to pose is, think about a significant historical event in special education. It could be litigation or legislation, anything you choose. And describe what was happening at the field, what you recall happening in the field at the time, and what your role was and your involvement. You want to start, Bob?
Not me.
Okay. No. We'll move down here. Someone else? Okay, I'll let you start. Or Ann.
I was getting a little bit of job coaching there by my ride. All history is personal. All politics is personal. So I will give you the personal story. Early 70s, working at the University of North Carolina at a branch where we responded to state and local government needs. The governor called up. He said, "Turnbull, I understand you're a lawyer." I said, "Yes, sir." "You're the president of the Orange County, the Chapel Hill Association for Retarded Children." I said, "Yes, sir." He said, "I want you to go to the Western Carolina Center, which is a large developmental center, absolutely a beautiful place. And I want you to look into something that's called aversive therapy." I didn't know what aversive therapy was. So I go out there and hear all these psychologists, psychiatrists, qualified mental retardation professionals, special educators. Lord knows how many professions they had up there. They even had a chaplain, which I needed. More than the psychiatrist, although things have changed. And they started talking about baseline. Well, I'm a kid from New York City. I know what baseline is. I went to the Ebbets Field. Home plate, first, second, third, and back to home. That's baseline. And then they started talking about the Learning to Be Better box. What's the Learning to Be Better box? They said it was a little box that we use in order to teach our residents how to behave. I said, "Well, that's fine, but you didn't answer my question. What is it?" Well, they said, "It's this little box." I said, "You're doing it again. Now, you want me to go back and tell the governor that you're hiding? I will be happy to do that, but if you want to disclose, now's the time." "Well, it's in another room." I said, "There you go again." Go get it. I came back. His little wooden box, about 4 inches wide, 4 inches high, 4 inches deep. It's got two little nodules on the top with a copper wire connecting them and a switch on the side. I said, "That's interesting. What do you do with it?" They said, "Well, when Stan Love misbehaves, which is very rare, because when Stan Love misbehaves, we race, we get him, we put him down on the ground, we lift up his shirt, we drop his trousers down a little bit, we turn on the switch, and we put this battery, electric shock, on the lower part of his abdomen, which is a very sensitive place." And I said, "Well, that's very interesting. Have you ever done that to yourselves?" Oh, no, 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 it's for them. And I said, well, I'll tell you what, you give that box to me. And I took off my jacket. In law, this is called demonstrative evidence. And I rolled up my sleeve, I turned on the switch, and I put it on my arm. And that's how I got started in this business. Part of the significant events is for people to hear it, see it, smell it, experience it, and the it being those conditions of people with disabilities that are absolutely outrageous, unacceptable morally and ethically and legally. And that's how I regard a significant event. It led to research on positive behavioral support, which is now an integral part of the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act.
I'll follow that serious presentation of Rudd's. And I'll have to say that's one of the things I love so much about Rudd is that he put it on himself. You know, that so often we're willing to do to others what we're unwilling to do to ourselves. And I think that really, Rudd, shows who you are. And I so value that.
You don't want to know the rest of the story.
But, yeah. Well, one of the things I was thinking about when was another trip Rudd and I made out to Western North Carolina. This was in the early days of 94-142. It was such a growing time in our field. There was so much potential, so much possibility of how do we implement this new law. I think our visions were it would be implemented far more completely than it has been implemented. But Rudd and I would work together, Rudd as a lawyer with what the law required, and then I would take the educational part of, okay, what do we do about that? And we were out in your part of the state, Fred and Charlotte, with a group of superintendents, and we were teaching them about 94-142. Well, I was the only woman in the room with about, 50 superintendents. It was the first day of deer season, and a lot of these superintendents had gotten up very early and gone hunting, and they were very sleepy at the end of the day and not real excited about having this lecture on 94-142, kind of the last thing they wanted to know about at that time. And Rudd gave his spiel, and then when I got up to give mine, one of the superintendents said, "Why do we have to stay here and listen to someone from Orange County Community College?" And the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill is in Orange County. And so he was putting down the university. And he said, "I'm from the university in Raleigh." And that's North Carolina State University. Well, he said that to the wrong person. Because I had been to Auburn University, as Sean Gallagher is on the faculty there, and I knew all of the ag jokes. And so I said, "You mean your university is the one where a 7-course meal is a possum and a 6-pack?" And the superintendents all laughed, and they kept saying, "You got him, honey. You told him, honey." And I earned a little respect from some of those men for putting down the guy who had 7-course meals.
So why don't we fast forward just a few years? As Lisa eloquently indicated, my area is severe disabilities. I don't know a lot about learning disabilities. I do know a little bit about severe disabilities. But it would have been in December of 2003, actually the 9th of December. TASH, the major association supporting folks with severe disabilities, was in Chicago. I had just finished a special issue for the journal Research and Practice for Persons with Severe Disabilities on research-based practices. And on that particular day, the 9th of December, proposed rulemaking was announced that spoke to the issue of allowing students with severe disabilities to engage in what we called alternate assessments, and those scores would count. Those scores would count for the individual. Those scores would count for the school building. So from my perspective, and perhaps some other folks' perspectives, like Adele, perhaps Jim Haley, who have worked in this area, it changed the equation. All of a sudden now, because these children's performance, both on a behavioral perspective and an academic perspective, were going to count towards the grade that the school building got, the grade that the principal represented, that either allowed the school to have a remediation plan or allowed the school to receive accolades because of the way they engaged with all children, including those with severe disabilities. And on that 9th day of December 2003 was the day that that proposed rulemaking was let to the public. I think history speaks to the rest of it. I had no input into that rulemaking, but I, along with my colleague Diane Browder, we were proud recipients of the consequences of that rulemaking that I think increased the likelihood of children with severe disabilities being included on a greater basis in public school environments to receive appropriate services and education.
I'm going to relate a moment that I wasn't really instrumental in, but I was witness to. And as a doctoral student, I did my PhD at the University of Minnesota, and I worked with Stan Dino, who is the kind of the father of curriculum-based measurement, as most of you know. And when I got there, it was still very much a developing technology. And he and a woman who became a doctoral colleague of mine, Phyllis Merkin, had published a little book called Getting Started Counting and Charting, and that developed into curriculum-based program modification and an old spiral-bound manual. And as a research assistant at the University of Minnesota, working with Stan, my job was to be out in the schools collecting data. They were looking for measures that could be used frequently to assess student performance on key skills so that that information could be used to modify an instructional program. And I was, every day I would ride my bike over to Seward School on my way to campus, and I would do data collection. And I know Stan would shoot me if he heard me relate this story, but they were kind of looking for effective measures and trying a number of different approaches, one of which was to have kids read the same passage every day. And I went for a full year and worked with a bunch of kids who, one of the things I had them do was read the same passage every day. And you can imagine, they got pretty good at it. And my favorite kid was Ronnie Ludgate, who had a bit of a speech impediment. And the passage he was reading was called Weeding. And it was a passage about weeds. And he would, to this day, I can hear him. He was a fun kid, and he would start out, and say, he would say, Weeding by Ronnie Ludgate. And that's so etched in my memory, and such an insignificant moment, but it was part of something that became so much bigger and has become so much a part of what we do in special education. It's now we talk about progress monitoring. Progress monitoring had its roots in curriculum-based measurement, and in a very small way, curriculum-based measurement had its roots at Seward School, where we were out collecting data and listening to Ronnie and the other kids as they practiced their reading.
Well, I have been blown away by all of you and where you have taken our humble beginnings and run with it. I'm so proud of you, all of you. When I had just finished my final orals, Herb Goldstein said, there's one more thing you have to do before you have your doctorate. You have to call Dr. Kirk Sam to his face. I never really completed my doctorate. It has been strongly suggested to me that I say that the thing that I remember was the beginning of the ITPA. I was really peripheral to it. However, I do remember one afternoon when Sam was due to make a talk to an important group. I think it was a parents' meeting in Chicago. And he was he'd been trying for a long time to find a term that was okay for these children that did not fit anywhere. They were not retarded, they were not academically talented, they were just these odd children. And he said to me one time, Laura, I think I'll call it learning disabled. How does that sound? And then he tried the term out on the rest of our faculty, and we all said that's a pretty good term for it. My earliest job was being a TA to Dr. Kirk in a course that he taught, that we would bring in a child at a time and try to identify what the reading disabilities were. There was no book for it. And he was a highly intuitive person when he wanted to listen to it. And he would manage it out of the air, it seemed. He would identify something that would help this child. I took good notes in those days, and he looked at them one time and he said, that's the first time I've seen what I was saying put down anywhere. And it's a good thing I did, because the next semester he got sick for 6 weeks, and guess who got to teach the course? I remember thinking as the first child and his mother came in, what do I do now? So I listened to them. And I heard a story of a mother and child that were working so hard that they would both end up in tears every evening, because the mother felt she was failing to teach the child felt he was failing his mother. And I said, the first thing I want you to do is throw that out and just have fun together for a little while each evening. Then later on, we'll talk about what kinds of job you might want to be doing. Well, as time went on, we've gotten a little better at it. I learned a few other things. There were 2 schools that granted doctorates at the time in special ed, University of Illinois and Syracuse. And I stayed at Illinois for the rest of my teaching career. I didn't know what I wanted to do when I graduated from college, but I knew I'd never be a teacher. And then I was a teacher for 40 years. Life is funny. I'd like to leave you with something that Jim Gallagher said. I asked him to keynote a little symposium that we were running one time, and it always stuck with me. He said that in special education, we try to do too many things with too few people. And the price that we pay of having not enough time is that the creative things go first. What you get done is the little boxes you have to check off and the rules that you have to follow. And I've always remembered that we need to think about maybe putting the creative things first. I think that's what you people are doing, and God bless you.
Oh dear, I don't know where to start here. I'll start at the beginning. I was not too bright second lieutenant in the Marines when World War II ended, and I came back to the university to get a degree. And so in February 1947, I managed to get a bachelor's degree from Berkeley. A bachelor's degree in what? Social science. What do you do with a bachelor's degree in social science when you have a wife and a small baby to feed? Oh, it's right after World War II. Male high school teachers were almost non-existent. They'd all been shot up in the war. So I decided to be a high school teacher. Never took a course in education in my life, of course. I was social science. And so I went off and became a teacher. Fortunately, when I was in the Marine Corps, they're trying to make a second lieutenant out of me. They taught me what you do is you tell them what you're going to teach them, then you teach them what you're going to teach them, then you test what you taught, and if you didn't do it right, you do it again. So I used that philosophy when I got into school. But the one thing I learned quickly in Annalee Union High School, a little rural school in Sonoma County, was that in those days, this is what, 1940, God, can't remember the date now, 47, yeah. In 1947, we had no school psychologists. That was the good news. Now, that's not today. Remember, this is back in... And the reason why it was good was that nobody could be identified. And therefore, we had total inclusion. What do you know? They hadn't even invented the word yet, and we already had it. And what I learned as a high school teacher very quickly was that you take, I had, 5 different preparations. And in each preparation, there were kids in the classroom that were doing very well. They stayed right ahead with us. And then there were 2 or 3 kids in the class that were bored to tears. They'd already netted all this stuff. So I sent them off to the library and do projects. And then there were the kids, total inclusion. I don't know what their diagnosis was because we didn't have any diagnoses. They were there, total inclusion. And I had no success with those kids at all. It just frustrated the devil out of me. I was used to getting what I wanted out of my students when I was a Marine, anyway. And I tried the same technique here, and it didn't work. And I was so frustrated, it sent me back to a place called San Francisco State College. There I got the first master's degree in special education in the state of state of California. Trouble is, I got my degree and an all-expense-paid tour to Korea at the same time. So off I went with the Marines. But anyway, the point was that it was so frustrating at not being able to get to children with any kind of a disability. I was totally incompetent, and I don't like to be incompetent. And so I was very lucky. And so later when I got through with the Korean War and then had taught for a couple of years, I went back to Cal State at San Francisco and asked my mentors there. Leo Kane was the head of the department, and Elise Martins, formerly the head of the Office of Education, Special Education in the federal level for years. Where's a good place to go to for a doctorate? Well, there's only 4 in the country, and so they named the 4 and so forth. So what the heck, I applied to 4. and I got all accepted to all of them. I don't know, they're very low standards in those days. Anyway, I then asked Elise Martins and Leo Kane and stuff, where's the best place? There's only one. And that's Sam Kirk at Illinois. So when I got accepted to all four, I then told Sam I'll come. Well, they weren't so sure about that. But anyway, they eventually let me in. Again, low standards in those days. We raised them as soon as they got through. But the chance to come here and be with Sam Kirk was really amazing. I used to say I learned more in the coffee breaks with Sam Kirk and with Laura and other people, just sitting around a table having coffee there. What do we have, about 4 doctoral students and 4 faculty, and that was it. And those were very exciting moments. And I learned a lot about how to teach people who were smarter than me. That is, you asked them questions, and you drew out from them. And that was Sam Kirk's technique. He was truly a mentor. And he'd go after each person's experience and draw out from them pearls of wisdom, if you will, that made my doctoral program a fantastic one. And so I turn it back to you.
So one of the next questions that I had, unless you have another story to tell, we want to hear stories, is a person who had a significant impact on you, who really influenced your thinking or who changed. I know some of you touched on that a little bit, but would anyone like to go first? Fred, did you want to? Okay.
I don't know that I need the
Well, we have to do it because we're streaming.
Oh, I can yell loud enough, but I'm sure. I just can't do this with one person. And based on the time as I'm looking at the clock tick by, I'm just going to list the people. I grew up in Illinois, not far from here. The first job that I had was a residential facility in a southwestern suburb of Chicago. I had a master's degree and made all of about $4,000 a year. My parents wondered why, both of whom were doctors, not PhDs, but doctors, wondered why they sent me to college. It was during that time that I met a young man, a gentleman that was on the faculty here at the University of Illinois. Very instrumental in the field of severe disabilities, Mark Gold. I wanted nothing more than to study with him. Well, it wasn't in the cards. I got accepted at the University of Florida. I think they had high standards. Well, the standards were the standards were high enough that I was rejected. I was rejected from the University of Florida before they accepted me. All I wanted was a chance. Just give me a chance. At the University of Florida, my major professor was Mary Kay Dykes. Those of you involved with the Teacher Education Division, Bob, Laura, Paul worked directly with Mary Kay when he was the chairperson at Florida. I learned my behavior analytics skills from a guy over in psychology, Hank Pennypacker of infamous fame, Johnston and Pennypacker Strategies and Tactics for Human Behavioral Research. From there, in the field of severe disabilities was growing, I learned to know the name of Dr. Norris Herring, one of the folks who was in that probably first class at Syracuse, the other place that was honoring or allowed to have doctoral training in special ed. Dr. Herring, as most of you know, studied with Bill Cruikshank. And through TASH, which was then AESPH, I came to know Dr. Herring. I finished my work at Florida. I did at least well enough that I earned the degree and did a postdoc with Norrie Herring. Bill Heller then hired me for my first university position at UNC Charlotte. And it was during the time, I guess I can't close this out without mentioning Bob Algotsine. Algotsine was on my committee. He worked very closely with me, and then Algotsine came to join us at UNC Charlotte. So those are the folks that have influenced my life, my career, and thank you. Yes.
Well, probably Rudd and I have the same person who's influenced us most. Maybe, Rudd, you might start, and then I'll chime in.
No. Oh, well, I'm much smarter than that.
Well, I know for both Rudd and myself that we have been most influenced by our son, Jay Turnbull. I mentioned Jay in my presentation last night. Jay lived to be 42 years old and went from some very challenging times to some very, very wonderful times. And from the very beginning, when Rudd and I first got married and we brought Jay to live with us, Jay was 7 at the time and Rudd's biological son from a previous marriage, I remember just feeling the humility test of thinking that this was going to be a cinch for me because I was a special education teacher and I'd had training in this field and I knew how to do this. And it was very humbling to be on the 24/7 side of things. And it was very profound and transformative in terms of Jay teaching us the realities and enabling us to live in the family world and in the professional world as well. I'm going to make another comment, but do you want to say anything else about Jay, Rudd? Okay. And then I think just even before Jay, Rudd was very transformative in my development in terms of when we married and really formed our partnership. And I mentioned that earlier with Rudd focusing more on the legal side and I would focus on the education side. And it's been such a wonderful partnership. Rudd and I were talking not long ago that it's just been so wonderful that over the years we've just not had an ounce of jealousy about what the other person was doing or any sense of competitiveness, but always such a supportive partnership. That I remember, this probably isn't anything to be proud of, but when we drove home from our honeymoon at Emerald Isle, North Carolina, we outlined our first article together.
Really sick.
And Rudd had far more experience with writing than I had, and I think he really was instrumental in mentoring me into authoring. And then the last person I'll just quickly mention is just a fabulous mentor, Ursula Markey, a civil rights African-American activist from New Orleans, who had 2 children with disabilities, who really taught me. So she took me to the woodshed a lot of times. She was tough in the sense of really being angry at universities for not doing more in underserved communities. And she would talk to me about how many universities would drop by for a touch of color and then be gone. And it was a wonderful partnership with Ursula and with her friends from around the country in partnering with them to support them in writing proposals that enabled them to get funding, to get a salary, to get health insurance, to get a computer, and to do the amazing work they were doing in underserved communities. And she changed me in lots of ways, and for that I'm grateful.
I'm not going to fuss about Ann buying another pair of shoes, not after that. We all wear different hats. I'm a lawyer by training. Never took a course in education. Lord knows why the University of Kansas hired me. But it did, and 1/3 of my professional work is as a special educator. And much learned from Ann, much learned from Jay, much learned from Elizabeth Boggs. Part of what we learn is personal. It's the personal history. And part of your responsibilities is to note your own personal history, your own personal growth, and then to be able to recount that. Your personal narrative counts. It doesn't matter where you end up. It's where you are. It's the process you follow and the people who come into your lives. So, lecturing, your personal narrative and my personal narrative involved Ann, Jay, and Elizabeth Boggs. My academic personal narrative involved Jim Gallagher, because as much as Ann taught me, Jim taught me at a different level. Ann was very practical. Jim was very conceptual. Not that Ann isn't, she is, very much so. But when we first got into the business, the man who began to talk to me about ideas was Jim Gallagher. And so part of your responsibility then is to be a teacher no matter what role you play. And then, because I was a lawyer, am a lawyer, there were four people who were profoundly influential to me. Burton Blatt at Syracuse University, whose expose about purgatory is absolutely mandatory reading for us. Paul Marchand, the governmental affairs person at the Association on Intellectual Disability, now formerly Retarded Citizens. And Fred Weintraub and Al Abeson from the Council for Exceptional Children. They taught me that we must take the personal narrative, marry it with the science, Jim Gallagher and Ann Turnbull, and then act upon it. And it's the action in the policy arena that Jim was able to bridge, that Ann has been able to bridge, and that Jay would bridge if he could have spoken it. And so part of our responsibility was to be the voice of people who cannot speak for themselves. 3 areas of work, and perhaps I think the greatest satisfaction has been to put the voice of Jim Gallagher, Ann Turnbull, Burton Blatt, Paul, Fred, Al, into Jay's life and then speak for him.
I'm going to mention several people who I think had a fairly profound impact on the course of my career. And one goes all the way back to when I was at ISPI, the Illinois State Psychiatric Institute. I mentioned that I taught there last night. And at the time I got a job there, I hadn't had a course in education. They kind of hired me off the street. A friend of mine worked there on one of the units and told me they were looking for a teacher in the school, and I got the job. And that program served 2 clientele. One was a catchment area on the west side of Chicago, tough inner city kids who were failing in school and difficult to manage at home. They wound up in the hospital. And then there was a program for disturbed and delinquent adolescents that was run. It was, I believe, NIH funded, or the precursor of NIH, by a psychiatrist at the University of Chicago, Dan Offer. And it had all the bells and whistles. There were social workers and psychologists and psychiatrists, and the staff members, and my buddy was a staff member on this unit, were all college educated. Quite a contrast to the program that served the kids from the catchment area. But one of the advantages of working for a program like that was that there was money for consultants. And one of the consultants who used to come in and talk to us in the school periodically was a psychiatrist by the name of Fritz Radel. And some of you may remember that name from long, long ago. I believe he was actually a student of Anna Freud's, to show you how far back he went. And he was an amazing man. He would come in smoking a cigar first thing in the morning, and I would sit in a little room with him, and so it had its downside. But he was so brilliant, and I don't know, for those of you who are familiar with his work, what he was able to do is to take these very abstract constructs of psychoanalytic thinking and apply them to what do you do with kids in a classroom. And a concept like proximity control, which we still talk about to this day, is a concept that Fritz Radel developed and extracted from the rather arcane knowledge structure of psychoanalytic thinking. And he made me think, this is actually pretty cool. And to that point, you know, to begin to connect what I was doing in a classroom with kids to real deep thinking and theorization was eye-opening to me as a young professional. One of the other people I think who was very instrumental was someone I mentioned in my speech last night, Joe Jenkins, here at the University of Illinois. And I'm going to relate a story that Bob and Laura may remember. But when I was a master's student here, we started our program, and then with, and I won't remember the details of this, but there was some understanding about the courses we were to take and the length of time it was going to take us to complete the program. And then all of a sudden that changed. And it was going to be longer, and it was going to, you know, and all the students were really, really angry about it. And Max Spriggs was the chair at the time. You remember Max? All right, well, maybe Max was responsible for this miscommunication with the students. But we all got really riled up and wound up talking to people on the faculty, and I happened to wander into Joe Jenkins' office to talk to him about the concerns that the students had. And he and I connected on a personal level and ultimately a professional level. And about that time, I had gotten a fortune cookie that read, if you don't know where you're going, you'll never get lost. And I thought to myself, it's a little take on the old, I think more commonly you hear, if you don't know where you're going, how do you know when you get there? And I thought to myself, you know, this is me. I'm kind of wandered into this profession, and now, and actually I thought of it because Joe was very instrumental in encouraging me to go on to get a PhD, which I did. Not because I thought entering into the program that that's what I wanted to do, but because he suggested it, and okay, that's what I'm going to do. And it turned out pretty well. It was something I hadn't planned to do. Many people today have kind of a career course, goals and expectations for what they want to do. I didn't. Joe made that suggestion, planted that seed, and it was one that has borne fruit. The third, it's actually a group of people I want to mention, and Lisa will resonate to this. When I first started, my first job was at Penn State, and there, you know, we sort of taught classes, and maybe you had the same experience when you were there, Jim. So you'd go and you'd teach this class, and you knew that it was sort of part of a bunch of classes that students had to take to get their degree and get their teaching certificate. But we never really thought about a program. You know, I taught my classes, other people taught their classes. We never sat around and talked about the program and should we adjust it or what, you know, and it wasn't really until I left Penn State, and my first job after that was at Florida State University, where Lisa and I spent our years together. And I got to Florida State, and there was a completely different culture. And there was a serious kind of focus on the teacher education work. And it was mind-boggling to me. You know, to this point, I thought about teacher education as everybody teaches a course, students take them, and then they leave. You didn't really think about how the courses fit together into anything coherent. And that was quite a different culture at Florida State. And it really got me thinking seriously about teacher preparation. I also was the chair, and of course in Florida, shortages were an issue, and there was a lot of political pressure to, you know, produce teachers and so forth. There was a real focus on the state, on the teacher education enterprise. But it really changed the course of my kind of intellectual life, and I began to take seriously the process of teacher preparation and began to consider it as a topic of serious scholarly work, which has defined my career since that point. So I thank my colleagues at Florida State and Lisa and the good batch of doctoral students we had in those days who really opened my eyes to something that has been very important to me ever since.
Well, the last question I'm just going to ask Laura and Bob. So, what recommendations do you have for all of these wonderful people in our audience who are waiting on the edge of their seat to hear your profound words?
Well, I've heard a good many profound words recently, but none of them were mine. I think I'll just say something that happened at a CEC meeting many years ago. Do you remember when there was a fad developed that you had to take a child back through his infancy, and first you taught him how to crawl all over again and such? I was at a meeting when the progenitors of that program were presenting, and he was up on the table crawling around the glasses and such, you know, demonstrating exactly how you had to get your feet and your hands in motion and such. When he finished, Sam Kirk said, "I have just one question for you. Does it work?" And the presenter looked at us and he said, "If any of you try it, let me know how it works."
Amen.
Okay.
What? There's nothing more?
Profound words, Bob.
Well, that's all I got. It's the end.
Well, we'll have many other opportunities to talk with Bob.
We're late.
We're going to move quickly into our next presentation. I do want to say one thing, though. As a professional here at the University of Illinois, and in all of my experiences, if I want to say who has profoundly affected my career, it's the people at this table and those people who came before them. So it's such a pleasure and a joy for me to have you here. Thank you.